Stanford University.
Welcome to the seminar on People, Computers, and Design. I'm Terry Winograd. One quick reminder, if you were taking the course for credit, unless you have a specific conflict, we ask you to come to all, but at most 2 in person. And if that's not practical, send me an email. The drop deadline is this weekend. So just save us all if the administrative stuff lines up well. Next week, we have Bjorn Hartman, who is finishing his PhD here this spring, and has done a whole series of experiments on tools for designers and designing hardware, devices, interactions, and he'll be talking about that work. Before that, he was an independent music producer as well. So he's got an interesting background, very interesting work. So that's Bjorn Hartman next week. That sort of ties into Bobby Fishkin this week, who, in addition to what he'll be showing you and the company he started called Reframe It, has done a lot of work, including being a playwright, published playwright with his plays performed in major places, and has started several nonprofit groups. You can read the bio in the abstract. It's pretty impressive. You expect somebody to be much older if they've done all those things. So I'm not sure whether doing a company like this is his main job or his hobby, but he's done a great job of it. One other minor thing which I always, from my personal point of view, like is that his parents are Stanford faculty. So shows you can do well if you're faculty kids. Okay, Bobby Fishkin.
Thank you. So let me start with the background and then connect it up to the technology. So while as an undergraduate, I spent 4 years on a project to look at what Tolstoy, George Eliot, Charles Darwin, E. Cummings, C.S. Lewis scribbled in the margins of their physical copies of Shakespeare. I tracked these down all over the world, sent a few thousand letters to librarians and private book dealers, and found those. And in the context of doing that, I learned a lot. So this is a document that you can see, you should be able to see. There's Tolstoy, all the characters speak the same way, and there's George Eliot's comment at the top. And what I learned in the process of looking at these annotations is that people for hundreds of years have been sharing certain practices when they've been writing in the margins of their books. They've been using the position on the page to know what they're talking about when they come back to it. They've not just written annotations as individuals, but they've passed them back and forth. George Eliot for 30 years with husband and lovers back and forth, and this really fascinated me. And I was thinking of this in the context of what I was seeing in terms of online annotation, and I was realizing that discussion tools show generally all the comments that happen at the bottom of the page, or they did at least in the news articles and all this. So what I said about doing, and I'll return back to the Shakespeare project in a moment because I think there's actually some further points of relevance here, but I basically created a technology that lets folks comment line by line in the margin of any web page. So you can see, right now I'm mousing over a particular passage, and you can see, let me shift this page over a little bit for the projector, but you can see that as I mouse over it, it highlights the section of the page that the person originally selected. What I'm really trying to do here is let people get much more specific than they've ever been able to get before about what the consequences of any content are, the causes for that information to be there. And I think that this creates some really interesting effects. So we can, so first let me show the technology a bit more, and then I'll try to lead to why this is important and what this can mean. So this is a map of the page. So this is a 30-page long New Yorker article on the future of innovation. And these comments, we call them stubs right now, they're, as I mouse over them, I can jump 5 pages up, 3 pages down, as I like. And what's interesting is that people are reading the same texts, but they're not right now realizing that other people may be reading the same sentence and be fascinated by the same bit. And so, my former college mentor used to say that social network segregation, more so than economic deprivation, defines real inequality. And I think that happens within text too. If you're not able to meet the other people who are really fascinated by a particular aspect of the text, then you're missing some critical aspects of it. So let me show you, as I mouse over a certain passage, here, as I mouse over, you can see, let me log in here actually. So this is a browser extension for Firefox and Internet Explorer. Here, let me get, sorry. So, let me get the full email address, sorry. So this is allowing annotation on 34 billion web pages. So as I select the text, it shows up in the text reference, and I can categorize the comment. I can type a comment, and I can share a comment via group, subgroup, sub-subgroup, or via friend or Facebook Connect, or via email. And I can also filter comments by showing all comments, or only specific groups' comments, or my friends' comments. Or I can zoom in on the page and show only the comments about a particular passage. But what's interesting is I see this as both. So the Talmud was one of the first texts that had direct juxtaposition of all the dissenting opinions around the page. And I see what we're creating here as something that can Talmudify the web, bring all the dissented voices, elevate marginalized voices through the margin into symbolic equality with the page. And nearness is something that is an interesting value, because in the history of the web, there have been some, well, first of all, in the 90s, there was something called Third Voice that came out that had a technology with sticky notes that popped up and covered up the page in question. And what's interesting is they got sued by 300 companies at the time. And later on, Google got sued by a porn company and countersued, and lo and behold, several years later, there was a unanimous ruling by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals that you can violate copyright by manipulating content, but it's impossible to violate copyright due to mere proximity. And what that means is that nearness is now become a right. So putting your content next to any other content is your right in American law. And that creates some really interesting things. So, this is just a comment on the New Yorker, but this morning I met with folks who are doing private VPN, so secure, anonymous browsing. And they're going to package our technology with them, and that'll let people in any despotic regime or any Middle Eastern or East Asian country that they have a lot of people using their technology with, use annotation in the combination with fully anonymous, non-traceable, non-trackable browsing. It creates some really interesting side effects. But in terms of what this is, I also see this as we can urbanize the text. So Jane Jacobs described the best cities as ones in which the right people happen to get to meet each other on the right blocks because they live near each other. And what that creates is a constituency that eventually can form stopping energy for bad things happening, in her case, an 18-lane highway through Union Square in New York, or starting energy for good things to happen. And through an interface innovation, you allow different people to meet each other and different people to gather their understanding around a particular content. In that case, that part of the city, in this case, that part of the text. So, one of the things that we've proposed to the Royal Society of the Arts and others is what would it take to create, and this is the longer term thing obviously, but to create a think tank of think tanks in which people can cross disciplinary lines effortlessly within any text. And I think that could be of real interesting significance, because to the degree to which we can reduce the marginal cost of social interaction around content and time shift our engagement of other individuals to the moment of maximal shared understanding when we're looking at the same paragraph and understanding one another through that, then through an interface we can enable a different degree of depth of drilling down on any content anywhere on the web. So in essence, what we've been doing is creating that technology platform. It's two and a bit years of work now in terms of full-time work on it. There's Reframe. It's a company of 12 people building the technology. There's a lot of fabulous people that have giving us advice, including Terry, I'm honored to say. And it's been it's been a fascinating process. We're working with different kinds of groups, and what's been interesting about it is we've learned that specificity is a value that is transferable. So the accountants of Ohio want to use it to annotate government regulation. Avaz wants to use it to protest things that they find deeply objectionable that an oil company says on their website. And if it's misinformation, okay, so this actually brings up another point. So if someone misleads someone on a website, right now that can be addressed somewhere else. On a blog, someone can write a blog and they could say, that website over there, that's not right. But the problem is the next person shows up at it and they're misled, and the next person again, and the cascade of consequence of that misinformation is never addressed. And that's a big problem, because medical misinformation gets people killed, all kinds of other misinformation has bad consequences. And so I guess what we're trying to do is let people signal and flag misinformation in context, so that we can, in Henry Louis Gates Jr.'s words, curb the power of misinformation to distort our conversation about things that matter. So there's a lot more I can go into, but I guess we could start a discussion or start talking. Yeah, awesome. I could talk more about this, but I'd love to hear initial thoughts.
Do you have an example of what happens on Wikipedia with this?
Sure, yeah. Well, I can give you a specific example actually on that. So one thing that's interesting is we've created a vagueness engine. So we use, as a page evolves, New York Times article gets updated. Stuff gets pushed down, stuff gets pushed up. I'm going to find a link to a particular Wikipedia article that has an example just for that question. But that brings up a point, that Wikipedia articles change. What we do is we archive the text reference point, and then we use these 30 heuristics to figure out whether 85% of it still overlap. And as long as that much is overlap, we reposition the comment on the page. It shifts up and down. That part started out very hard, because we have this category at the top of the screen. You'll see orphaned comments. Most of the comments were orphans in the early days, after a few hours, and we felt like we were running an orphanage. And after a while, we found homes for more and more of them. And these days, only one in a few hundred comments gets to be orphaned. But yeah, absolutely. So I mean, Wikipedia doesn't expose the debate part. It does bury it, but it doesn't expose it. Whereas we can say, here are, this was actually a test page when creating the product, but these are all comments that show up, and you can see there are indeed 5 orphaned comments that show up here that have lost because the Beaver article has been updated. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's an interesting process, because Wikipedia just recently added what we call catch and release. So they don't let new people edit until it's been approved by some authority who's been there for a while. And we think that process is happening more and more. And one of the things that we've architected our system around is anyone can share a comment if they're a member of a group, and that includes restricted groups. So we have public groups, restricted and private, and restricted groups let other communities or institutions act as filters to take a whole set of annotations and say, these are really good, whether because they create them or whether others do and they edit them and say these are great. So I mean, I think from an architecture standpoint, we've learned both from Wikipedia, we've learned from Twitter, we've learned from the discussion tools that are out there, and try to fuse it all together into a vision of what dialogue and context could be. You raising your hand? Or?
So we've seen a bunch of these systems over the years, Third Voice, Equal, there have been a couple others. What's different this time around?
So several things. First of all, I think that it is actually significant that we're not covering up the content that's being talked about when the annotations are all happening in the separate space to the side of the page. It's not just a legal issue. I think it's also from an interface point of view, what that's saying is you can see the original page as it was. The annotations are an extension of that content. And what we found is that both educators and people in the corporate world, as well as a lot of associations, find that to be not a trivial distinction, but a major distinction for them. And that was also part of our process of talking to them, is that we learned that really matters. We also are doing some other things that are different. We're doing this in a different context. So the the screens have gotten wider. That allows us to be accommodated. We're integrated with Facebook Connect and this kind of thing, which allows annotations to be social, with social graph being exposed in ways that it wasn't. Also, we're I think the focus that we've created is we can, so a given community will have a few web pages that they annotate a huge amount of, right? And then a long tail of others that have a small number of annotations. The existing technologies that have come through, Dijo would be a more recent sticky note example. Stickies is another. My Karoo, Awesome Highlights. I mean, I admit there's been a whole series of annotation technologies, but they're focused on just the long tail, to the exclusion of those few web pages of intense annotation. But for any given community, they need both. So there's a sense in which we're the first one that can accommodate the full breadth of needs of being able to have the depth and the breadth. So that's the start of an answer. Sure.
Do you comment on the words or the URL? So if I comment on the second chapter of Tom Sawyer, does it only appear on Gutenberg.org's copy?
Right now, yeah, it does. And by the way, you can also, it's not just that you comment on the words, you also comment on the images. But yeah, it's right now, it's tied to that sentence on that web page. And there is a company, I understand, in stealth mode that's trying to do the sentences, a global unique identifier for every sentence on the web. They're 2 years overdue for launch, so that may be a harder problem than it looks like. I think that it is something that we'll eventually get into. I think it's just something that's a big problem. All the different versions of articles.
I was curious, is it out now in a form where it started to get some comments on current political things?
Our technology?
Yeah.
Yeah, we did, and we had a lot of annotations during the election season, and that was really exciting to see. There's an underground hip-hop community of 100,000 people who just started using it, and there's a group of people interested in women's issues, Feminist 2.0, are using it in different ways. There's a lot of different kinds of use that we're seeing. We're scaling the back end in the next 30, 45 days, and then are going to let a lot of the partnerships and distribution agreements we've been putting in place actually take effect. Basically, we really want to get it out there because we see this as a transparency engine for the web. So there's a moral mission, there's a commercial mission, and we've tried to figure out ways in which those can intersect. And I mean, we're on the commercial side, we make public annotations free, and we license it for private use, and we support the public stuff through advertising. On the social mission side, we've been giving it away for free to groups like Workplace Fairness to annotate employment regulations, and we hope to keep giving it away for free to lots of nonprofits and let them use it and play with it and enjoy it. And it's been a trick to figure out how we can do this in a fundamentally different way than has been done before. But I think a good problem is one that a lot of people have felt is important enough to solve that they're willing to devote themselves over the years to solving. And there have been, my estimates, 50 web annotation companies that have come out in the course of the last 10 years. And we're hoping to be one that succeeds. There's been a lot of them that have gone out of business. And some web annotation products have been tried and then killed. Google Notebook was a technology that was killed last week. It had been worked on for 3 years. It's the kind of thing where the need is real. But it's like, so John C. Brown, who's on our advisory board, was helped popularize the fax machine, and he said that the fax machine was initially popularized because people wanted to annotate the contract, send it back, and and in the first period of that just meant people didn't have enough fax machines for that to be worthwhile. But once people could, then there was real value there, and I think. The person who invented the word marginalia is Coleridge, right? And he, was the father of marginalia, so to speak, because 75 kings and queens and dukes across Europe were so interested in what he had to say that they would send him their books, and he would scribble in the margins of them, and he would send them back. And they wanted to see what he had to say in context because an essay was insufficient to get the line-by-line reactions. And I think that value is just as real now as it was then, but finding the circumstances in which that value can thrive is our challenge as a company.
There was the example, you discussed some medical examples, but there was also the example of classic literature, for example, about tying the annotations to all copies of a document versus a specific copy. I was wondering if you've considered just doing that. Obviously, it's a very hard problem to solve in the large scale, but doing it in specific domains, such as the medical research publications, because that has a huge effect, as we know, and just doing it sort of on a domain basis in the meantime.
Sure. I mean, I think that there's ensuring that an annotation fits everywhere it deserves to fit is a beautiful goal. I think that it's something that we've thought about in terms of using quotations, that we could take direct text quotes and reapply pieces of marginalia from one place to another and all this. I don't know if it can be solved on a domain-specific basis without actually addressing the broader problem of redoing this. There might be a way to do so. I'm not out there. I should say that there are some restricted communities of doctors who want to use this for within that community medical annotation, and I think that's it's really important because it's a particular siloed set of disciplines, and to the degree to which two doctors are reading the same article, there's probably reasons that are implicit and not currently being exposed as a research methodology. And I think there's a number of the owners of the scientific journal databases want to integrate this as a technology to let that happen, and I think that would be a fantastic thing.
Question about librarianship and attribution and licensing. And I don't know anything about much else about it, so I apologize for the night question. One of the frustrating things is the nitty-gritty of actually getting direct attribution to something on the web at all. And have you thought about that? And as I read some person and there's some authoritative person, and I actually want to include that in a dissertation or something, rather than trying to hunt down all those details from my bibliography, it would be nice if I could just port that out to EndNote or get the correct form of the attribution. And is there, as you input or register to make comments, is that kind of seamlessly built in? And secondly, can I license my comment? Can I make a comment and let's say, for lack of a better example, apply a Creative Commons license to that app?
So good set of questions. On the first part of it, there's a technology out there called Zotero that might address the specific attribution need. I think in terms of license, we've set it up so that a comment is cross-licensed to whatever groups it's shared to by the creator of the comment as well. And we're thinking of adding Creative Commons as a checkbox that could be added to that for a group that a user shares it with, and this kind of thing is something that someone can choose to do. I think that there's two other points that I'd like to make in the context of what you're saying. I see this as a way of creating bite-sized chunks of peer review. So someone may not want to write a full detailed response to a paper, but if they could add a sentence, the granularity of that might be something that might allow more qualified people to add qualified opinions in a particular piece of work, which I think would be great. Also in that context, some of the boards of certification, Engineering Board of Certification and others, have expressed the idea that if people could add annotation as part of earning their certification to say, I'm keeping up with the field, I'm proving that I'm reading this stuff, then that's a way in which the technology can be used to demonstrate someone's actually learning, which I think could be a great use.
Bit about how you've got tools for managing larger conversations, more dense conversations. I'd like to see some examples or hear some of what your strategies are for managing things when the conversation gets dense and complicated. Because you want not just to be able to let everybody get their word in, but you also want somebody to be able to make a view of it that says, here's my edited view of what the important points in the conversation are. And things like the Talmud and how you don't want the conversation crowding out the original text. You want the original text to still be visible while you hold on to all the things going on.
Sure, and I think that the three architectural points that I would make in terms of what we're doing to address that are catch and release. So a comment can be submitted to a group, and until the group admin approves that comment, it does not get shared with the rest of the group. Hierarchical organization of subgroups in which permissions filter down and comments percolate up. And sure. So and then I'll show you the subgroups being listed in this context too. But the other piece of that is that the open architecture in terms of anyone can share. So this is just Team Reframe Strategic Planning Group. This is a group we use internally. And then we have a set of annotations and subgroups to parent group, subgroups, business development, conferences, competitors, all this different kinds of pieces. So, and those comments filter up into the parent group, and then we receive daily or weekly or monthly digests from all the annotations made into that. And we also are adding navigation from the margin to any of those comments. But yeah, so I mean, in terms of managing the large conversation, being able to zoom in on a specific paragraph and only see the annotations on that paragraph, we think that's critical. Being able to filter by group, we think that's important. And just so you're clear there, we can filter by my groups or a specific group, or
Are most of those groups managed by an editor, or are they mostly crowdsourced voting?
Yeah, I mean, it's both. So an institution can have a group. So some nonprofits that are already using it have groups that they manage and that they moderate. But there are also public groups that some person that I've never met manages. And there's every combination of that. There's also only show me comments by my friends. And I think all these things allow you to say that, it's like a prism for the page, that we separate all the different communities of people who'd be interested in that article. And from my point of view, I think it would be fabulous to see on a New York Times article the local ramifications of national news and the industry-specific ramifications of news of relevance to multiple industries, and be able to filter that accordingly.
I'm curious, the bottom line of the menu mentions noted authorities.
Indeed.
How did somebody get noted?
At this point, anyone who's written a book, we will verify their identity and put a link back to their book. But it's something where in the future we hope to do more reputation and awards and all that kind of fun stuff that you get when you have critical mass of users and it makes sense. Right now it's a pretty open system. There's 34 billion web pages, and there's the vast majority of them don't have comments. At the same time, it's something that we think is important is that it's not just a tool. So a person can individually use it to take notes, or they can annotate and push those to people they know and provide full value. I show up at a page and expect to see what annotations there are because they're going to be them. That's something that we're going to hit at a later point of scale when that becomes likely. But within a group, within a community, we think that's very possible.
Public comments that you are collecting, what about searchability? I mean, do you provide a search that people can go look for it, or are these comments already being indexed by search engines, or what's kind of the issue?
So they're all being, each comment in each web page, an independent URL, and we're indexing them through our own full text search of our own site, and also search by user and by group and all this. Yeah.
For the users you have, do you see like a clear distinction between like users who mostly annotate, or like versus like users who mostly just read annotations, or do you see like users doing both?
Sure. I mean, I think a lot of users do both. I'd say two things. That in forums online that exist on newspaper sites, etc., about 10% of people add comments, and there's 10 times as many readers as annotators. In marginalia, in printed books, about a third of Americans write regularly in the margins of a book, and a further third did write regularly in the margins of books while they were in college and then stopped the practice after they left the university. That said, I think there's a very wide group of people who discuss the news over breakfast, and there's a number of micro groups of people who read the news as a family already through our technology that have said warm things about that process of being able to be connected across the country with one another that way.
What might you see as the sort of relative temporal evolution of base articles versus the comments on them? Again, thinking of if it goes over the years.
Base articles and the comments on them.
Well, the subject of the comment and the comments themselves.
Sure. I mean, it's interesting because we initially created an ontology in which we allowed multiple kinds of labeling. So label it by tag, by subject, by category, and all these different things. And what we've ended up doing is put as much labeling weight onto the group architecture as possible. And we've done this because it's interesting, because we want people to be able to implicitly gather around a category of knowledge and receive updates about that category of knowledge where there's someone that's managing what that category of knowledge is. So everything is miscellaneous, the book about the failure of hierarchical organization of knowledge. And I think that it's interesting because to the degree to which someone connects what are all the ways in which all these comments are about something important, then it can be a great effect. If to the extent that people are meaning 20 different things by the same categorization, it quickly becomes a mess. And so what we've tried to do is have people manage a category of content and then create as many subgroups as they want to, or subgroups to organize it. And then what we're trying to do is eventually let the, route not just information, but ideally route innovation, right? Because if a particular innovation is a structured set of knowledge, right? And it can't, it's not just that you have to shovel something from one place to another, but you have to have its roots in context. In this thing was tried in this social context in this city. Here are 50 web pages that discuss its successes, its failures, what went wrong, what went right. There can be comments about all those things in context, and then the group is the whole set of knowledge in context, so you can drill down, but you can move the whole thing into another information architecture. So I think that's why we've tried to create as open a structure as possible.
Can you comment on specific text in a page? Is it PDF or Flash or just things without?
Right now, just HTML, and Flash is not on the roadmap. PDF is something that we hope to add in terms of annotating. I mean, PDF would be great because people could annotate, all the federal reports. We are going to be annotating a number of pieces of federal legislation with a couple consortiums of think tanks. Excited about that. And I mean, the goal, I think, is to create expert layers of annotation on that kind of thing and citizen-led annotation layers, and to try to network the two together. Actually, I might be able to show you a picture that help on that in 2 seconds. But so is there another question while I'm getting that? Well, I'll show that another point. But it's basically, I was just going to show something that said that comments could be selected by intermediary groups of experts who could help route the annotations.
So I was thinking of, like, for use in a class where you get students to comment, have a marginalia on a paper they're reading, but usually the thing they're reading is a PDF, not a HTML.
Right, or a Word document for that matter. Yeah, it would have to be published in HTML at this point to annotate, or you could annotate the Google conversion of the PDF.
So Google conversion actually produces an
HTML
page.
Yeah, so you could annotate that. Absolutely. I mean, it's basically this. I mean, we hope that the time shifting piece of this can be really important. Howard Rheingold's class is actually using our technology to annotate their class conversation, and it's all catch and release. So each person reads the text individually, then after everybody in the class has read it, a button is pressed, and everybody can then see what everyone else annotated all at once. And I think there's a lot of learning value there, instead of writing the one-page reaction papers and all this that a lot of high school students would do, and some colleges still do. Go through more pieces, but anything you wanted to?
You said you were doing advertising. I don't see it there.
Yeah, there's not right there right now. So we are going to have advertising at the bottom of the margin. It's going to be bottom inch of the margin. We're going to show it larger when there's no comments, and smaller or not at all if there's too many comments on the page. What we're going to try to do that as, I mean, the pitch to a newspaper is allow your community to move together throughout the web and this sort of keep coherent as they move across, and then revenue share with the newspaper, for example, to say that they can get revenue from their users annotating any external site. But it's we launched the technology after the downturn hit, so from a corporate perspective, it's challenging. But from in terms of what the technology does, I really do think it's important that people can challenge misinformation anywhere it is, and I think I think there's a lot of value that we're just uncovering as we go through it. So, sorry to. Yeah.
So you mentioned Facebook Connect and being able to integrate with that. So now when somebody uses that approach, does that comment still become public, or is that a comment that is restricted just to their Facebook network?
Yeah, it can be either. So, well, and I can show you in terms of general annotation points. As I select text, I can share with the entire Reframe here. So I'm in these groups. I can share with the entire Reframe community, and you can see those are grayed out accordingly. And that same process when I check Facebook Connect does the same thing. So, yeah, it's interesting because we were asking about the ratio between creators of comments to readers of comments, and we're actually focusing what we're doing now on the pitch to creators of comments because the readers are brought by them effectively. We see it, and I think that it's interesting. So we're going to prioritize my comments, my group's comments, my friends' comments, both in the margin from what people want to discover when there's an empty margin. We call it empty margin syndrome, when there's just nothing there when you show up at a page. And we're going to try through the website to do the same thing, to try to make your universe of it prioritized.
Is there any threading structure in the comments? My comment,
yeah.
Your comment?
Yes, absolutely. So let me show you the. So I can, yeah. Let me just see. There's a reply there. Not interesting comments because this was our test page, but you get the idea. Yeah. So it can go as in-depth a dialogue as people want, and I think that's something that's really interesting because I think that right now there's someone says something and there's in a news article, and then it goes out to these 1,000 blogs. People talk about it all in their own little separate communities, and to the extent that we can draw that back into influence, what gets reported on. I think if you have people commenting on, News Trust is an example of people reviewing the news articles themselves, and that happens still elsewhere. And this sort of creates a open letter to the editor kind of model of what that means. So a micro letter to the editor, which I think is really cool.
There's been a lot of discussion on the web lately about just conversations and comments and how comments are becoming an integral part of the conversation. So have you considered actually using the same technology as a comment replacement tool on a blog site, I'm assuming you can just as well embed it so that it shows up for everybody going to a particular site, as opposed to them having to use the toolbar each time, right? So like if I have a blog, instead of using intense debate or discuss, can I use Reframe it in order to do comments on that blog?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's something that we're going to be adding at some point in 2009 to integrate with the blog as something where a little piece of JavaScript would show the margin open on that page, and I think that's it's really cool to get that to happen. I think the issue with folks like Discuss is they've got to get one by one each blog to agree. And we focused from the beginning on an individual user, any web page. And I think that we're never going to get both WhiteHouse.gov and ExxonMobil and the Sudanese government's homepage to agree to allow comments. And so there's a certain place for what's different about this. But I also think that synchronizing with the existing ecosystem matters. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from a perspective of symbolic equality, the example I'd say is, in the 2004 Republican convention, there were people protesting in the Bronx, and because they were told that they couldn't protest in front of the convention. There were thousands of them. And there were 100 people protesting right in front of the convention. And there was not a single news article, maybe like one, about the people in the Bronx that were protesting. And there were several hundred about the 100 people right in front of the convention, because they were right next to it. There's something visceral about that. I mean, we think of people as reading texts, sequentially. We read a text and we look up things that it refers to and things that refer to it, and we come back to it. And in fact, it's the degree to which out of sight is out of mind, and the degree to which people disagree with each other. If I disagree with a blog post and I refer to the blog post, figuring out what I'm actually referring to is often a challenge. It's not specific, and people can fight about things and not actually have a disagreement. So, one of the metaphors we've used is saying that we don't, that sort of Google drops someone in a city, a given web page of the city, and we take them right to the door that they need to go to. It's sort of the last mile of getting them to figure out what the content means to them, effectively.
If you do try to develop an annotation scheme for blogs, I suggest that you offer as an option moderated use, so that the owner can keep things sort of under control. Although there would obviously be the option of going outside of that system.
Absolutely. And I think the moderated, what we've done with what we call catch and release, which is a form of moderation, is in place in part because we want to offer that to bloggers for their blogs. At the same time, if this person has the extension, we're not going to let the blogger stop people from annotating their blog without their permission. We've had actually a small number of companies approach us and ask, could we pay you for you to prohibit annotation on our site? And I kind of view that as a protection racket more relevant in Sicily than in where we are today. And sort of this is the point. I mean, I think they may not have read quite the mission statement if they asked that question in seriousness. But that just, brings up that they're not asking that question to bloggers to stop blogging about them, right? But they do view nearness as something of significance and something that surprises them. And occasionally I get a very shocked reaction from a person who owns a website. You mean you're going to let people comment next to my site? It's my site. And I understand. I mean, our thinking of the web is right now a feudal system. Each person's got a castle, and everybody owns their castle and feels very happy that they have a castle. The trouble is, information has started to have greater consequences. And to the degree to which those consequences are socially shared, Swiftboat Veterans for Truth had a consequence. And to the extent that gets countered in minor channels rather than major channels, that's a problem. So, I mean, we're trying to reduce the floor in terms of participation as much as possible. So we've created a non-extension iframe viewer that allows instant viewing of annotations that have been shared, in addition to the extension as the full power of what we created. And we're trying to see if we can make the response to bullshit as easily accessible as possible, effectively. And that said, work with bloggers where we can.
Can you go from users to pages?
Yeah. So this is our website.
Discovering content.
Yeah. So, for example, there's this lovely article on the most commented on pages. The EPA has some model for what to value expected loss of life at, and during the last administration, they reduced that value by $900,000 without mentioning it to anybody. And this is an article about that. And I think what's empowering about it is that right now we kind of have to read an article and do something elsewhere. And I think that I was at the time saying, I don't know if they still. I was the first annotator on this article. And what's interesting is then 5 other people started getting involved in the conversation. After I started writing about it, and so it's both funneling people to circumstances, and I think anger is a motivation that gets shared and easily cross-referenced with other people's anger. And it's not that this is early technology. Nothing that happened because we were angry, except a few more people learned about the thing. But at the same time, I think there could be, and I think that in the context of the private VPN folks were getting packaged with in the Middle East, I think they've got a third of the users in Dubai using their secure anonymous browsing. I think that those people annotating government websites or corporate websites can actually have consequence and have relevance, I think.
So is there a way to get on and say, what has Bobby commented on lately?
Yeah. Sorry to... this also reflects there's following in friends, and our architecture says if you follow one another, you are friends, basically. Yeah.
Follows one-way link.
Follows a one-way, and friend is a two-way, and that reflects a digest. So so here's the RSS feed of my comments, and here are the comments I've recently added. You can see the text reference in context. This also brings up. So let me show you the tools section here, actually. These are the comments I've made just showing up on the website. But in the tools section, should ultimately load. Basically, the same thing that we're doing here can be placed on any blog as a widget. An index of group or subgroup or user or page or domain, all the comments that are made on that aspect. So we view it as sort of Twitter is sort of avoiding all context as its whole mantra, and what we're sort of doing is connecting little bits of context with little bits of content and trying to have that network be valuable. Yeah, so here's the widget, and it can be placed anywhere, and I can I can't rate these because I made them, but so, it's the same difference. And then see, I can reproduce one of those for any of the particular groups I'm in. Go ahead.
You mentioned the Ninth Circuit ruling, and you mentioned some of the legal stuff. So, have any of these companies actually threatened you, or?
I would say that there's been people at conferences who who I had to mention the legal circumstances under which we can do this to make sure that they would not take such course, because I think that they just said that can't be legal. I can't believe the American courts. But what's interesting is it's not just American law. There have been 10 years of developments in European law that have been in the same direction. It's now just as firm there. It's less firm in China. It's less firm in the Middle East. But we're based in the U.S., so I think that we can do this in a reasonable way. It's interesting because, I mean, I think the whole ability to create a technology like this is sort of based on previous disruptions. So Google was disrupted one market and used the resources to change the law. Netscape disrupted a market, created Mozilla, and that created the possibility of add-ons. And it's sort of each technology follows in the wake of all these previous things. And we couldn't do what we're doing without hundreds of years of annotation, years of litigation, years of other people trying and failing to get annotations sorted. The interesting thing is that none of the other annotation technologies have really broken through. They've all been small successes or small failures, and I mean, the industry is littered with them. So there's some sense in which we're absolutely crazy to be trying another annotation technology when there have been previous ones that have failed. But I mean, the same is true of a lot of industries, that there's all that merely because people are really attracted to doing something means that a lot of things get created. But the particular combination of what it is that you're doing before it actually works is just a bit of magic and a bit of luck and a bit of timing and a bit of the right people. And I think we've got a really talented group of people I'm working with. The team is a third in Bay Area, a third in Boulder, and a third in Vancouver. All the front end work is in Vancouver and back ends in Boulder. And they each use different metaphors for understanding the significance of it, for understanding what they're doing. And I think what's interesting is that we, for the first time in a year, got the whole group of them together for a whole week and realized that we were all thinking of it in different terms, but they all kind of fit together in really interesting ways. And I think that's, if each person I approach in the public, if I'm communicating, I say it's like writing in the margin of a book, except for the whole web. A lot of them don't realize that they're even using a browser, let alone what an add-on is. They say, oh, that's just the internet, right? And that's been a really fascinating learning curve for me to fit on. And at the same time, the associations that I've talked to, they are, technologically speaking, they don't. Their members have already started using the web for their primary sources of information, but institutionally, almost all the associations out there. There's a fascinating meeting called the Association of Associations, in which there's 480. I even met the head of the Association of Local Association Coordinators for associate. I mean, like 3 levels of remove. And these people right now are still sort of in sort of a SharePoint mind frame where they want to purchase whatever resources their members need and bring it to their site and let people into the fortress once they pay their membership dues. And we're kind of turning that inside out. We're turning the gathering of people into something that happens externally, next to all these external sites, and letting the permissions be something that's controlled centrally, but nothing else, effectively. And I think that's really valuable. It's sort of flipping the whole way of looking at it around.
You mentioned companies and said, can you prevent, presumably a country could just block your servers.
So something like the private VPN tool would, we believe, get around that to a significant degree, because the company I'm mentioning, they encrypt and they proxy, and they proxy all the browsing through Holland and through other sort of countries that don't really interfere with this kind of thing. But you would know far better than I, but I would think that under those circumstances they could probably see it. You think? Yeah. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, and we will probably get blocked by someone who's angry at us at some point, or someone will try to. Technologically speaking, the browser gives extension priority, which is a really interesting position to be in over the web page. It's just that extensions have not gotten out there that much. We met with Mozilla 2 days ago, and they see this as a kind of new category of extension, that they think of it as something that really small clusters of people can find kind of value from, not just purely in an entertainment sense, but there haven't been as many tools that have been extensions that have had relevance to the web page in question. And then they think that this is sort of a whole new space that's going to be booming, of course. And the first ever add-on conference in the history of the web happened 6 weeks ago. And there's a sense in which it feels very wide open. It was interesting at that conference, 180 companies that had add-ons. Very, very few people with MBAs, very few people with the whole, the business part of it as their focus. It was technologists and creative folks and people who came up with the technology. But I also kind of feel like that's sort of a good indication that this is where the people are putting their passions, and that the sort of business folks come to the industry when it gets extremely well proven out financially. And at this stage, there's been a total of one major exit that was based on an extension, stumble upon. Other than that, it's perceived as something that some individuals want, but that's not a business. There are other models of what we're doing. There's a group called ShiftSpace, which actually takes a different view of copyright than we do. So you press Shift and Space, and you can manipulate the page and edit the page. So I can edit my New York Times article and have my version of it edit. And by American law, it's patently illegal. By the European Union's law, it's patently illegal. But what's interesting is they're backed by the Swiss government. And the Swiss government says, we don't really care about your interpretation of copyright law. We're going to give a lot of backing to this technology they have. And they say, the Swiss government says, we are backing a global art project in this regard, which it's an open source thing. And it's pretty cool. The thing is that, I think that there's, what we're trying to do is connect annotation to real world needs, and not just changing content for the sake of changing it, but actually changing the consequences of content. And that's where nearness comes in, as opposed to manipulating content, I think, in a real way. And also where nearness comes in, as opposed to sticky notes to cover up the content, in a sense.
So maybe talking about another use case. This question maybe has kind of a marketing point of view as well as a technology point of view.
Sure.
So what sort of support do you provide for where the ultimate need is to create a document, a group document that has support? Direct segmentation, or just in terms of generating the sense of it through the marketing aspect is when you talk to organizations and associations, do they have a need for not just annotation, but actually annotation for the purpose of aggregation into co-equal documents in some sense?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I think that we've tried to not be a direct competitor to, say, Microsoft Word track changes or the wiki as a technology, because I think that those are fundamentally about document creation as opposed to annotation. At the same time, I think that something that we do want to do is actually create a snapshot of all the annotations that are on a page and export that as some kind of document that shows, like the Talmud, all those annotations around the text as something that has coherence and longevity, and that you can collect a set of it and use it elsewhere. It's a question that we've been asked, but it's not a question we've had a sufficient answer for yet.
Yeah, the sort of use case that comes to my mind is a technical workshop where you have maybe between half a dozen and 3 dozen participants. Everybody puts out a position together, and somebody's got to come up with a sample workshop.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because I think that the way in which that's so far happened a bit is there can be sort of a table of contents page or a web page that's linking to a subpage, and the subpage has a lot of annotations, and the parent page has the link. And what we have seen is sort of group moderators or group liaisons or people who kind of take a leadership role in the group annotate the page linking to the subpage. And that's sort of a way in which it sort of summarizes all the things that happen beneath the fold. But yeah, absolutely. And I think, I still think we don't have a sufficient answer to the need in the question that you just asked.
You doing anything to Chrome?
Not yet, but we would like to. We hope to. They haven't released their framework to do so yet. So when they do so, we can do. This also brings up a point. We did Firefox first, and what we learned is that it takes 10 times as many man-hours to do an add-on in Internet Explorer as Firefox. We've had no less than 8 other companies ask our advice on how to do this for Internet Explorer or do any number of things for Internet Explorer because it's really, really hard. And it's one thing we've actually gotten working. But yeah, I think Chrome would be fantastic, and Safari for that matter.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, reframeit.com. I'd be honored for any of you to add your annotations. And so yeah.
I was wondering if you have OpenID. One of the reasons people don't comment is because you have to register. So just forget it. If there was a way to just kind of...
We have OpenID. We're OpenID enabled, and you're more than welcome to use that.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.